look like going into the 21st century? Again, how do we create an inclusive society? And what does that look like going into the 21st century? Before delving into this, let's talk about what does inclusive mean. It's including much and everything, especially including stated limits. Society, an extended social group having distinctive cultural and economic organization. So to start us off this evening is a newcomer, a gentleman that I had a chance to not really see, but talk to a little bit, and that's Mr. Gary Turner. Good evening, Mr. Turner. If you would start us off, please, sir.
Coach, Brother Carter, and to everybody else, thank you for having me. I was on last week's call, and so I appreciated that conversation and had a follow-up conversation with Rory. I'm long-winded on some questions, Coach, and so don't get upset with me. I will attempt to keep myself at 1 minute. Hello to everybody once again. Look, as you stated the definition, I think for me, when we think about a society that's inclusive for Black folks, and so I will only focus on our people, which is what my major concern is and always will be. A society that is not exclusive, and it is a society that is not left out because of our race. Very simple. The question for me becomes, how do you structure that society? And I think we have to have deeper conversations for us as Black folks that we have not, at least I have not heard of had before, in terms of looking at the contract that exists in this society between its citizens, those of us who were born and live here in whatever way you want to define a citizen. We have to have a clear conversation in terms of what is the contract between those individuals and whether or not that contract is manifesting itself currently in a way that takes care of all of those individuals defined as citizens and residents of this country. And we know that it's not. That contract is the Constitution of this country. And we have not had a conversation about how do you restructure a society based upon an existing contract, that Constitution, when we were left out. When that Constitution, I remind everybody on this call, when that Constitution was drafted and was written and finalized, we were considered sophisticated animals. We were enslaved. And so we have to keep that in mind. And I know that there are some prohibitions that the so-called founding fathers put into that document that prohibits potentially a rewrite of it. But I think that's a larger conversation for this society to say, is a rewrite of that Constitution needed? And I think it is. So.
Thank you, Brother Turner. That wasn't quite as long-winded as you had predicted it would be, but was very succinct and precise, and I do appreciate that. Brother Reggie, could I get your opinion on it? You heard what Brother Turner was talking about. Talk to me, share with me your thoughts.
Well, first and foremost, good evening, kings and queens. Let me say I had a little difficulty with this topic, specifically. How does a group who've been minimized create something when they have been based on this environment, as I would say, minimized? And so I looked at it a little different, which took me off topic. I said, how do we empower ourselves? And when I looked at inclusive, I looked at within my community of empowering our own people, because I think by looking around at this group, to ask people who have not done that and have not made us part of that process of including us, then they have that power if we give that to them. And so I guess I looked at the topic just very different, and I apologize for not sticking to that point, but I just looked at it to self-preservation of trying to create that within our own community, of dealing with poverty and trauma within ourselves versus asking someone else to Mother May I give us, help us, support us. And so maybe I got a little radical, but I want to pause right there to all the experts as we listen, because that's just not how I look at this thing, because it hasn't happened in all these years, and I don't see any reason for anyone being able to do that at this point. Not giving up hope, but I'll stop there because I'm sure I'm over my minute.
Well, I appreciate you being time conscious, but please do not hesitate to share your opinion. That's what this is about. Brother Al.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit like Reggie. I mean, if we're talking about inclusive just amongst us black folks, that's one thing. If we're talking about the larger society, including the United States Constitution, that's very different to me. So, where do we really want to focus is my question.
Well, that's part of this question to you is what is your focus? When you say inclusive, it is, you can narrow it or you can broaden it. And I think your perspective is what we're looking at. I believe inclusiveness in order for us to reach the goals that you think about what we've been talking about for the last 13, 14 weeks about the things that we should do, could do as a people that would allow us to progress, but not only progress just as a people, but progress as a society. So we have to have impact into that. So I guess what I'm saying, when you look at that inclusiveness, if you look at it just from us, or if you look at it, are we going to exclude when we talk about inclusiveness? Or are we going to, how are we going to do that? What is that going to look like?
Well, you know, I'm glad we have some clergy on the call.
Yeah.
Because my mind kind of goes to a Christian perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
And from that perspective, you know, there is no racial division. There is no male or female in Christ. So from that perspective, you know, if we're in Christ, that's a whole different ball game.
Okay. All right. And that's good interpretation of that. Brother Harold.
Thank you, Brother Carter. I hope all are well. While you were talking, I went back and pulled up the question that Edward sent out. And it says, how do we create an inclusive society in the 21st century? I don't think that we can.
Okay.
In an all-inclusive society, all identity groups would be equally represented and valued.
Okay.
That is not going to happen. I don't see that happening, even as Al said, from a religious standpoint, I don't see that happening. I think the church has been complicit in overlooking inclusiveness all through their history. Even in Book of Revelations, there are two groups of people. There are the group of people in 619 that were 144, and then there's a group from all the saints, all of the good people. If we look at being inclusive, can we tolerate the disadvantages associated with race and sex and religion and cultural differences? And my answer to that is no.
Okay.
How many of us believe that in diversity there is strength? We just mentioned blacks as a culture. That take away the strength of inclusive society because we're only talking about one aspect of the society. How many believe that there is a basic innate difference between men and women? If we believe that men and women are different, we are not speaking of an inclusive society. How many of us believe that there is a moral difference between political parties? If there's a difference between the Democrat and Republican Party, or blacks and white, we are not all inclusive. And that goes against the question. How many of us believe that in Western society there is a systemic belief that the white male is above the black male? That is not being inclusive. How many of us believe that that hate is against the principles of God? Many of us do not believe that, and we don't practice it every day. So I think the question of can we create an inclusive society in the 21st century, I think that no, I say no. And I think that all of the rhetoric we use to define ourselves as Christians does not touch the bottom of our heart. There is something called pride, and there is something that we will not admit, that we will not forgive. We do hold grudges. And as long as we have those things within us, we cannot be in an inclusive society, because inclusiveness means taking away every disadvantage there is in race and religion and cultural differences. So can we be inclusive society in the 21st century? My answer is no.
Brother Turner, and having listened to some of that, how does that set well with what you were saying, as it appears to be that we have some difference on how that's defined? Is that anywhere near what you were talking about?
With all due respect to everybody on the call, no, not at all.
Okay.
I believe you can create an inclusive society, but I'm talking about if you have to start with something, and the document that I was referring to that we all know about is the Constitution. That's the contract between the government and citizens of this country. There are things that arise out of that particular document that we've never dealt with. I understand that we moved from slavery, and this is a larger conversation. We moved from slavery to emancipation to assimilation, and now many of us have moved into this whole notion of adoption of somebody else's systems and values. But we never participated in the restructuring of this society. Assimilation is not restructuring. And so that contract, my argument is, that should have been rewritten a long time ago to at least move us closer to what we would be called, and I agree with my brother potentially, Brother Harold, and others, that we possibly can't get there totally, but we can become closer to it. The majority of our people, tens of millions of our people, although we made so-called great strides in terms of jobs and education and money, many of us, but the bottom line is that the majority of our people are still locked out of this society. And so there are some things that we need to address that starts with that contract, independent of a contract between Black American, I'm talking about a contract for the citizen society. Then we go into the issues of what I would think about economic parity. What does that look like? What does educational restructuring look like? So it's a larger conversation. So if that answers your question, sir.
Well, it does. And I think I like what we're saying, but sometimes it seems like we forget about moving forward, that we always try to start from where we are. A lot of time looking at where we have come from and what status quo is. What I envisioned and believed in this question was we're establishing anew. We're making a different stride. We're trying to create not what we're currently existing in, but something that would be different. That was kind of the way I looked at that. Sister Johnson, I hope I remember her correctly. Am I correct? May I get your thoughts?
I believe that
I got it right.
creating an inclusive society is a work in progress. We have not by any means arrived, but we are making more strides than in the past. And I'm thinking from the Christian point of view, do you think maybe that's why God is still waiting for us to get it together, to be inclusive? Because until we get to a certain mark, we're just there. We're just there. So I believe that it's quite possible that we can have an inclusive society. We have made progress, but we still have a long ways to go.
And interesting enough that you say that progress that we look at is across the board. It's not the progress needed and the progress made is a broad spectrum of things that has to come together. It's not just one aspect. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
Thank you, Valerie.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here on another Sunday. I appreciate everyone's comments, and I agree with Harold. I don't think an inclusive society is possible, not based on our history, not where we've come from. I believe we have made strides, but creating an inclusive society, I don't think is possible in my lifetime.
So now what I am hearing is that we're looking at a time limit for this taking place. Would you concede, Brother Gary, and the rest of the panel, that this probably won't be in our lifetime, but it's not that it cannot happen. I don't think many of us will see that. Could you agree with that, Brother Gary, or do you have a different opinion?
Well, once again, I agree with Brother Harold and my sister that just spoke. I don't necessarily believe that it will take place in our lifetime, and I'm not sure that it will ever take place. I'm
Correct.
simply saying that in order to get there, you have to start with a particular document called the Constitution. We've never had that conversation. Nobody has raised it, and if I'm incorrect, somebody needs to correct me. I remember Brother Malcolm in his writings reminded us. He said that in order to be a diner, two things have to take place. I have to be sitting at the table, and I have to be partaking in the food that's put on the table. There's another proposition that Brother Malcolm did not get to, and that's the proposition in terms of how do you finally become the person that decides what the food is going to be and what's going to be on the table. That's that value proposition. And I will give you a definition of the word value, taking the ideas, concepts, and beliefs of those that are different from oneself seriously. Once again, I repeat, I understand assimilation and I understand adoption, but we have to deal with the struggle at this point in terms of directing young people into in a different direction, so to speak. So in long response to your question, my dear brother, no, I don't think it would take place in my lifetime, given the fact that I'm 67 years old now and retired.
I'm younger than you, my brother, and I understand how you look at that. I'm a young buck. I get what you're saying and believe that it will be there. But to your point, good point. Let me pose a question here, brother. Thank you, brother Gary. Brother Reggie, what I'm concerned about is that I hear a stoppage, an obstacle before us, that we stop right at this obstacle and say, it cannot be, it can't, because we haven't had, there's no discussion or activity for moving ahead or appreciating the many steps that we make. Am I incorrect in my analogy? Or is that what you see, or do you hear or feel something different?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that, but I guess I have a different perspective. I'm reminded a couple of weeks ago when I first got on the call, and the conversation was around, is it easier to build strong children than to repair broken men?
Correct.
I go back to that same brother, Honorable Frederick Douglass, who said a battle lost or won is easily described, understood, and appreciated, but the moral growth of a great nation requires reflections as well as observation to appreciate it. And when you're dealing with reflection and observation, if all parties are not willing to participate in reflection, observation, and act upon it, then morality, which part of what we're talking about is having a morality conversation. And when a country is built around power and money, and one is not willing to participate or share in that, then to me, it becomes a mute conversation, in that they have to come to the table because we can't force that upon them. They have to want that, whether you're talking about rewriting the Constitution or whatever. And so for me, it's all about how do we liberate, because liberation, again, the act of setting someone free from what? From poverty, from a lack of education, from injustice, and et cetera. And if you're not willing to do that from those who are in power or those that have the resources to cause change, then we're talking about something that we have to create within ourselves, within our own community, and go get it versus asking someone to help us. And so although I agree with what you're saying, I just think that to ask someone who hasn't done it in 200 plus years, and now we're saying, well, maybe this next time around, I agree with everybody. If it's going to happen and we depend on them, then I agree it's not going to. But when we start looking within ourselves, self-empowerment, then I think there's hope.
Okay, brother Reggie, right there. Uh, would you agree at some place here that we are working from the aspect of the future that you're talking about? We've started inside our community and started working out. We're not asking for anybody to give it to us. We're asking for us to have a fair shot at the table. Now, am I wrong in that, or do you see that, or do you see us
I don't see
backstepping?
it. I don't see it
Okay.
because what's unless you're dealing with a morality issue, what's in my advantage? What's to my advantage to share power and resources and money? If it's what am I getting out of that unless you're looking at it from a morality issue and know you've done wrong. So why would I share? Why would I include others to participate in that unless you're looking at it that is morally inhumane, is morally wrong? Then what's in my best interest for those that hold power to do what you're saying? I don't see it. I don't see it happening. And maybe I'm pessimistic when it comes
No.
No, hear me out. I'm pessimistic when it comes to asking someone else, but I'm very optimistic when I go to look within myself and my own community being able to do it for ourselves.
But that's my concern right there. Are we not seeing any movement at all within our own communities to have effect on that? All of this that's going on around us, are you saying that's non-existent? Or are you saying, I would agree, but I would agree it's not enough, but we can't ignore that it's not happening because it is.
I guess it depends on where you're measuring it from. If you're talking about slavery, then yes. If you're talking about Jim Crow, maybe. But if you're talking about physical slavery and being able to make it as overt as it used to be and now it's so covert, then I would say absolutely not.
Okay. All right. Good point. Brother Al. Thank you, Brother Reggie.
Now, I'm glad Reggie introduced one word, morality.
Okay.
When you look at that against where Brother Turner was talking about, the Constitution is generally accepted. You cannot legislate morality.
Okay.
That just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
That has to come from within a person. And I look at it from that perspective. I have to share what sounds like the futility many of us are sharing, that that's just not likely to happen ever, really. And even from a Christian standpoint, you don't want to try to outguess God, but I almost believe that some of the diversity and challenge that we have on earth was, not necessarily, I guess it even was designed by God. So I don't know that it's ever going to get resolved.
Okay, Brother Harold?
In 54 AD and 60 AD, when Paul was doing his ministry and doing his writing, he talked about there was no Greek, Jew, or Greek or Gentile. The society at that point was not inclusive. When Brother Turner mentioned the Constitution, the Indianapolis Convention in the 1870s, the Constitution was written, society was not inclusive. In 2020 and 2021, when we reflect on Western society, we will find that society is still not inclusive. As a matter of fact, we will find that there is a systemic problem in America. And that problem is one man trying to be above the other man. We have been working on this, and this is a good philosophical conversation. But in actuality, even when you put the strength of the Christian belief into this, society will never become inclusive because of man deficiencies. There will always be somebody who wants to be better than the other people or the person. That is not inclusiveness. There will always be somebody who wants to be one up on somebody.
Now, are we taking inclusiveness and trying to take away growth, individual growth? Does inclusiveness mean we all have to grow together? Or does inclusiveness mean we have an opportunity to grow together? And I grow at my pace and you grow at your pace, you grow at your skill level, I grow at mine. What you're talking about is an opposition or divisiveness, going and continue that we will always be separate by race, by economic, and by those factors. Am I encapsulating that correctly?
Yes, inclusiveness does mean growth, but when you look at realism, when you look at what has really happened in the Western society, you will find that we have not grown morally one bit. The same sins that existed in the ADs are the sins that exist today. The same pride, the same greed, the same hatred that existed in Paul's day exists today. So we've not grown then. We can say philosophically we have grown. When we go out and touch the things around us and leave this conversation behind us, we'll find that we have not grown. You grow inwardly.
Interesting.
We really have not grown inwardly.
Okay, thank you, Brother Valerie.
I'm going to pass on this right now. Thank you.
All right. Brother Edwards?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I just want to highlight is the fact that when we talk about inclusiveness carries many directions. I think what Brother Turner was speaking about in reference to our inclusiveness into this particular country, it comes from a document which, when we say cannot, we won't see it in our lifetime. Many of us on this call believed that we would never see a person of color in the office of presidency. And so now when we say that, we say, well, that was only one. But one of the things that we need to do is, as I talk to younger people want to say that we were not taught some of the things that caused us to be this angry in the current situation. Why are we not inclusive in the decisions that are made in the particular country that affect us from having access to the privileges that a particular race has? Now, in reality, competition, which was actually built on the backs of human character, will always have someone who is trying to outdo someone else. But is competition always bad? Competition makes the other person work to their full potential in many cases. So when you look at competition and say there's always going to be someone who will be on top, then why don't you accept the role of being on top? Because when we speak about the original man, if we believe, and if you're looking at it from a religious perspective, if we are the indigenous people, then in reality, we should be on top. But if we sit back and say, well, we may not ever get to it, is because we're not working towards it. And so coming out of these particular conversations is the reason why we put this program together, so that we can have these particular questions, we can address these particular questions, and we can come up with strategies. Because you know what, the one thing we all can do, we can sit up all day and talk about what the problems are. But once we start to put together solutions and we start to say, this is the way I'm going to implement something in the area for which I am growing, then I think we can talk about the word inclusiveness. Because inclusiveness means that we have access to the same privileges that everybody else has access to.
Thank you, Brother Edwards. Sister Johnson. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Okay, there you go. Oh,
what was the question? What was that question?
Well, it was a follow-up. Basically, some of the panelists have pretty much come to the conclusion we would never, ever, ever have inclusiveness because of, basically, they're just saying it's just not going to happen. Do you agree that it's unattainable?
I'm an optimist person.
Okay.
I'm very optimistic. Okay. So my view would be we have not arrived, but we can start. There should always be a starting point. There should always be a moving forward. If we fall, always fall forward, because then you would at least there's a lot that we have to do, but I'm very optimistic, and that's what I would say.
Thank you, Susan. Brother Lewis, I have not, welcome back. I would love to have you join us if you would. Thank you very much.
Yes, I was just listening to the conversation. Got in a little bit late. I had another conference call. And I'm trying to process and digest what's been said so far.
Okay.
The topic is about inclusiveness. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I wasn't privileged to the first part of the conversation.
But your opinion, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm not afraid of sharpening iron with iron, but my question would be, is inclusiveness, should that be the goal? That's one question. Is all inclusiveness good?
Second question.
That's the second question. You know, is all inclusiveness good? So I don't profess to know the answer to that, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. I'm thinking out loud here. You know.
Okay. All right. Well, good point though. I think you do raise a question that we should take a look at, because is it a desire? Because we're saying we're never going to see it. We give all the reasons why we can't do it, but is it something we need to obtain? Brother Pearson, may I get your opinion?
Some of my thoughts when you said inclusive, I thought inclusive in what? Inclusive as an individual. For me, I have the things in life that I want. I'm included as much as I want to be. I don't want to be a part of nothing else right now that I'm currently not a part of. So I'm as inclusive right now as I choose to be. Now, if you talk about inclusiveness as a race, at what point does our culture become a part of the culture that we're desiring? Because as we impact our culture becomes a part of the makeup of what we call in this thing that we're trying to be inclusive in. So that's an ever moving target, what we're shooting for. The reality is, whether you choose to be included and what efforts are you going to make to be whatever part or whatever it is that you want to be.
Now, Brother Lewis brought a question that we to look at. Is it good? Is inclusive worth our effort? It is the total efforts of what we're doing. And a very simple thought, is it good for us? Does it really make sense for us to be there? Brother Turner.
Yes, sir.
What's your thought about that? The question that Brother Lewis brought up was, is it good for us? Is it the ultimate goal? Does it make sense for us to be there?
Well, I guess I'm a little confused. I don't disagree with anybody on this call.
Okay, no.
But let me respond in as best I can.
Sure.
As I struggle with that thought. I thought we have always been fighting to be included in society. Wasn't that what the civil rights movement was about? I mean, hasn't that what we've been done during all this particular time? Pardon my grammar. But there's some words that were used during this conversation, but earlier on, my dear brother Reggie used the word liberation. I agree. He talked about the measuring stick. That measuring stick, if you measure progress by a person who has been enslaved and considers themselves a slave, progress looks good. If you measure progress by somebody who should never have been enslaved, then progress is nowhere. We've not moved anywhere. And so when I'm talking about, when I raise this issue, and I know it's going to be a difficult conversation, I told Rory, because, you know, as we define inclusive, I'm simply saying a restructuring. Dr. King talked about a transformation and a restructuring of a society. I am not a practicing Christian. So when you talk about Christianity, although I was raised in a Baptist church in Mobile, Alabama, and came through all the rituals and all the stuff. I'm not a practicing Christian. You know, I always remember whatever my religion is, my belief is, I leave it at the door in order to talk about these particular conversations, because religion gets us in trouble. We can accept that or reject it, but that bottom line is, from my teaching, religion gets us in trouble. And so I know that's a long way of responding, but I'm struggling with this question because I always thought that's what we were looking for, to be included in society. And what we did was assimilate into society. I always remind people, society was never integrated. This society was never integrated. Assimilation is not an integration. We all know that. And so now I think we have to go back to what, potentially even going back to what Du Bois talked about in the souls of Black folks. And there has to be that intellectual wealth that rises to the occasion, who are the seers for the future generation, as opposed to those individuals who are simply the technicians. And we've had a lot of technicians, but we have not had a whole lot of seers, those individuals who can foresee the future, who work on that particular piece. You know, I'll close it out, that piece, by reminding myself and reminding us, when you read, Du Bois talked about, you know, the talented 10th, but what he was really talking about in that context, as an example of somewhere he lose. I haven't read that book in 1,000 years, not that old, but I remember reading and him saying that if you produce men who are money makers, you can produce great money makers, but they will not be men of integrity. And we have produced too many people who are focused on the issue of the meism and the money makers, as opposed to the collective wealth of our people, which is why I mentioned once again, tens of millions of our people are locked out of this society. I do fine, Gary Turner. Gary Turner's retired. I'm financially secure. I'm all of those particular things. But the majority of our people will never get there. So, point of reference. Thank you.
Good point there. Brother Reggie, where are you on that? I mean, is that not what this is all about? Isn't that what we're talking about today? Am I wrong? Give me direction.
Well, I so agree with Brother Turner and so many, and a lot of other panelists. But I think when we say inclusive, I think we got to go deeper and not be so general about the word inclusive, similar to what Brother Harold, one of the other brothers said. But when I think about inclusive in a capitalist world, inclusive in capitalism, when you think about capitalism as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. So what are we trying to be inclusive in? And so that's why I stop right there, because again, when you're dealing with capitalism, and capitalism is based around power and money, and then we talking about morality, well, those things may bump heads. Maybe they shouldn't. But right now in these United States, they tend to bump heads. We're having a moral conversation, and I was listening to Brother Pierce. I'm going to be okay, but it's not about me. It's about my kids, my grandkids, and everybody else, kids and grandkids. And so when I look at it in a broader sense, then I have to open myself up to say, if this country is built around money and power, and one is not willing to let me participate, and it's been so unjust, then I have to create my own. I don't want anything bad to happen to anybody, race, creed, or color, but yet, when I've been deprived and you're not allowing me to participate in that, then I have to push back and say, truly, what am I asking to be inclusive of? I'm not asking, and so that's why I have to get clarity, because I don't think inclusion, if you're saying be patient and growth over 200 plus years, and yet we're still fighting that same battle around having a moral conversation, a morality conversation, and it's interfering because one has no, what's the motivation to share that power and that wealth? And if I'm not willing to do that, then I'm fighting a fight that coming to a fight, excuse my expression, with a plastic butter knife, and everybody else shooting hand grenades and bazookas and cannons then it's not a fair fight.
Well, absolutely. But see, I think you've hit on the point that I'm talking about, is that opening up our mind, because we sound very narrow, in my opinion. First of all, we talked about all that couldn't be. We never talked about what could be. We're talking about what is not bad, what has not happened thus far, but we haven't talked anything about the future. And I do agree you have to define inclusiveness and how value is it to you. Does it have any place in your life and value? Brother Lewis, go ahead.
Yeah, but Chairman, let me mention this, and why I raised the question.
Okay.
I think that somebody talked about the battle with the butter knife. I think perhaps we may be, I'm not saying we may be fighting the wrong battle. Not so much using the wrong instrument, we might be fighting the wrong battle.
Okay.
I don't want to be a part and included in a system that that has grown and feeds like a parasite off of the backs and the misfortune of others. One of the reasons why our communities fell apart after the civil rights movement is because we wanted to be included in the suburbs. We wanted to be included in the malls that were built outside of the city, rather than investing in our own inner cities and all of that. And this idea that the inner city has always been woo and shooting and drive-by, that's a lie. That's a lie. There were times when our community, I'm 63, and if I had a few more years, I could probably talk in terms of old, I'd probably talk more authentic about this. But I remember communities when there were black doctors, where there were black dentists, where there were black teachers. I remember community when we were included and inclusive, and then all of a sudden there was this dilution, diluting that came about, and all of a sudden we lost what little identity we had. And we've never captured our full identity back, but we lost it. And let me tell you this about inclusive. When I say inclusive, I'm saying if we can convince ourselves to look at the motherland, the Garden of Eden, where we came from, and I am a practicing Christian, by the way, but I do have some Pan-African type of mindset. And let me tell you this, and I'll shut up at least because I don't want to be loquacious here. If Africa shut down its borders to every parasite and every person that comes and robs from its continent, and if we as a people here in America, or people of color actually around the globe, and if we connected with our homeland, our DNA, where we came from, and hooked up with those brothers, and our goal was to be inclusive on that level, then capitalism would fall. Not that I'm trying to admonish it to fall, because that's where the action is. It's not here. This is a byproduct of a whole lot of other stuff that comes from Africa. If we just shut down the cobalt, if we just shut down the minerals that are in our cell phones from Africa, just shut it down, Apple wouldn't even make another cell phone. But we send our little kids down in the holes sometimes that caves in and never come out. And when they come out with a hand, just one handful, a rock that fits in one hand, they might get $5 or $10 for that day. But by the time it reaches Silicon Valley or China or wherever, that one piece is now a couple of $100,000. That one piece, because it's the connecting link to our cell phones. So I'm not trying to be radical. I'm just simply saying maybe we're fighting the wrong battle. Maybe we're trying to be inclusive with the wrong individuals, rather than going back to our country where most of our problems could be fixed if we as African Americans, with the brain power, with the education, with what we fought for, what little we have that we fought for, we connect with those brothers over there. Remember, I'm talking from a brother who lived on the continent for almost 8 years. So this is not something I read in a book.
Amen.
We did that. Maybe the inclusiveness needs to be there, rather than trying to include ourselves in a society that was broken from the beginning and is still broken. I don't want to be included in a system like that. I don't. And if you don't believe it, the Indians you don't even talk about the massive Holocaust of the Native Americans from trying to agree and shake and believe in, to be included in that kind of system. And assimilate to some degree.
Yeah, right. So I think one of the largest questions that I'm hearing from everybody is the definition of what are we being included, what are we building inclusiveness in? That's probably the greatest question. Brother Al, your thoughts? As we are developing this a little bit more now, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad we brought in economics.
Yep, got to, yeah.
Because, I think underlying a lot of what we're saying is the belief that capitalism is the way to go.
Okay.
And maybe that is, and maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly, as many have said, the objective of capitalism is profit.
Mm-hmm.
And that profit is the means to efficiently allocate resources.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that individual who is a capitalist has that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may be good while you're making your profits
mm-hmm.
to realize you're not doing that in a vacuum. And you need
Right.
to be a responsible citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the person who is most successful as a capitalist is likely to accumulate significantly more assets than society in general. Now, if you're looking at, we talked about socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Is that preferred to capitalism? Personally, I don't think so.
Okay.
From the time I was probably 19 years ago, I used to make the statement that if tomorrow, and even I say today, there were an equitable distribution of wealth across
mm-hmm.
the country, and even if that meant that, based upon what I've been blessed to accumulate, that on that day, that everything was equitably distributed,
mm-hmm.
that I would have less then than I do today.
Right.
But I'm not so sure that would be objectionable to me,
mm-hmm.
because I know that with my attitude and desire and drive, the day after that happened, I would be one of the richest persons in society, because I would be able to take advantage of those who needed help with their resources.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. And let's understand that we cannot, the economic driving force cannot be ignored, because we cannot let's be honest now, that's how we exist. That's a part of us allowing us to grow and building wealth and building the ability to sustain ourselves. We cannot exclude the economic factor. Brother Harold, your point.
There are two statements in the biblical text that addresses itself to what we're talking about, especially the comment that Brother Pearson made some time ago, minutes ago. He said that he had everything he wanted. Salvation is inclusiveness. That's the biblical text. And there is something else in the biblical text says that we should have a peace that passes all understanding.
Okay.
I don't have that. As hard as I try, I don't have that. I agree with religion. Capitalism has taken me captive. I want stuff.
Got you.
Even though I have a comfortable life.
Yeah.
So even though I have a comfortable life, I'm living a comfortable life. Every day I see something I want. And because of that desire, it causes me sometimes to live out of the realm of having peace that passes understanding. It causes me to live outside of the realm of seeking salvation because I want stuff. And after I get that thing, I want something else.
Okay.
So I am not inclusive. I do not have the peace that passes understanding. I do not have that glorious salvation that is referred to. And I see Ms. Johnson is really listening in. I do not have that glorious salvation that makes me all inclusive, that I'm satisfied with myself.
But Brother Hal, let me ask you a question. And since you're there, is that a society issue or is that a personal issue? Because as you laid out the biblical principle of what the desire is, the lack of action or action is personal. Agree?
It is both. It is personal and it's also society. And in my nature, because I am flawed, I think more of my person than I do those around me. All of my prayers, or 90% or 98% of my prayers, is to bless me. I don't remember a time when I prayed for Donald Trump, but I go to church every Sunday and I seek the things that Brother Al so passionately talk about. Realism is false for me because I really don't concentrate on those things all the time. I am not attuned to be inclusive. I'm tuned to be me.
But you are articulating the idea of perfectness. And when we reach the state of perfectness, you wouldn't be here. So the pursuit of that is that our model is, using the biblical principle, is to try to pursue that perfect state of state with our Lord. Now, if you're not doing that, then is that society? Is effort, or is it a walk that you have as an individual?
It's a walk that I have as an individual. Will I ever accomplish a perfect state? And the answer to that is no.
I don't think so.
The answer to that is no. Will I ever seek to be inclusive? And the answer to that is no. I am a black person. I prefer music that on the upbeat. I don't prefer country music. Country western music always on the downbeat. I prefer the upbeat. It's sold to a
But it
song.
seems like we're taking the individual out of this. We're taking out one's individual persona to live and join in other efforts. But I have to be me first. I've got to live my life so that I can be a factor and a force in another situation. If I'm going to move into this movement, I've got to be who I am first. So if I'm not all of that, does that make me negative? That make me not a part of? Or does it scars me? Or does it not encourage me to continue my walk?
Well,
it's personal.
It's personal. And there's a quote in scripture that says, since we have this great crowd of witnesses around us, we should run the race that is set before us.
Okay.
I don't care about that great crowd of witnesses most of the time. I care about me.
Okay. So but that's the human dynamic now. That's the human dynamic.
Somebody else.
All right.
Most of the time is spent working on me.
Okay.
Not on everybody else. So I can't say that I'm inclusive because my attention is focused on me. We talk about, am I my brother's keeper? No, I've got to keep myself.
Okay.
That is in my life.
All right, Sister Johnson, you heard him pontificate about his theory of that. Do you agree, disagree? Do you have a better vision of what he's saying? Not to put you on the spot.
Wow. Well, let me go back up to inclusiveness.
Okay.
When we break it down, it can be categorized as measurements, scope, goals, the struggle. Like others said, what do we want to be inclusive in?
Correct.
Everything, certain things,
right.
And then what arena or what level are we focusing on? When we pull it to the religious point, all of the things that Brother Harold said is true about the peace that surpasses all understanding and the crowd of witnesses. But what we also, there is a portion in the Bible that states when Jesus was speaking to the man and he said, if you want to be great, sell all that you have and then, give it away. So that part leaves us bare with none of the economical and the things that we pray for, and we want to have the things of life. So
and remember, Pastor Johnson, the reply to that statement, that man told Lord, hey, I ain't doing that. I ain't selling everything I got. He was not being inclusive. He was being personal.
Exactly. So I'll leave it with, for the land, for things to be inclusive all over the land. The biblical point that we can go on is 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then we'll hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal the land. So until the land is healed, there will not be a global inclusiveness. Until
and we will not ever do that. As a people, we would never do that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
True.
Okay.
That's possible. That's possible.
Right. Mm-hmm. All right. Brother Pearson, did you have a thought?
I can say, when I say I have everything I need, I'm speaking in terms of my basic human needs. But I do, like Brother Harold say, I do want things. I do desire things in my personal life, spiritually, as well as you have, and for my kids more than anything. But when we talk about inclusiveness, are we really talking about equal opportunity? Is that the bottom line of being inclusive? Because if we have equal opportunity, then that would mean that we have every opportunity to do whatever we want to do, and we have to take advantage of it. So if we're going to look at inclusiveness as being equal opportunity, then that's a whole different subject, and that's a whole different way of looking at it. And I think that's kind of the narrative that we're all circling around, and from different directions. We want equal opportunity.
Right. To advance ourselves, Brother Edwards.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the original statement for which Gary Turner spoke about. And when we talk about the Constitution, there were seven articles that were actually sort of the guiding principles of the Constitution. And one of the things that has been the defining sort of argument of those who feel that the Constitution has not been justifiably favorable to them has been those 7 articles. And now I'm not going to go through the 7 articles. I just put it out there for you all to look what those 7 articles consist of. But one of the things that when he speaks about sitting at the table, like we reboot our computer, when we go back and make amendments to the Constitution, there have been 27 sort of amendments put into the Constitution since 1789. And none of those constitutions has ever changed the definition for which he spoke about in the beginning as us being sophisticated animals. So when we talk about inclusion, let's just be inclusion into the human race. Let's be inclusive into that conversation that we are considered human beings in this world instead of being sophisticated animals. When we talk about the financial or the what is it called? The status for which we're talking about economically. Economics, there's a very powerful statement that says money is a wonderful master. I mean, a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And when we're driven by the foundation of money, then we're never going to be inclusive because of the mere fact that we've allowed all of the things that we have been responsible for to be stolen from us. All of the things that would give us the opportunity to catch up in this 400-year race that we were not able to start. We'll never catch up financially. But when they talk about our economic power, we are the 7th largest economic power in the world collectively as Black people, if we were to look at what our economic power is. But when you talk about inclusivity, let's look at the document for in this country, not just in this country, it governs every other country that deals with us in this particular world about how they are treated based on the 7 articles, which are the foundation for the United States Constitution.
Brother Turner.
Yes, sir.
Having heard that, is that in your mindset? Are we on as you perceive it Are we on track, off track? Where are we?
Oh, I think Rory hit the nail directly on the head, and I think others did too, Brother Reggie and others, directly popping the nail, so to speak. I'm only talking, let me make sure people understand who I am. I don't know people on the call except Rory, and I'm getting to know everybody else, hopefully, and we'll always be at peace with each other. But I am not an assimilationist. I had to participate in society like everybody else did until I got old enough to retire and do what I needed to do. I don't necessarily believe in this. I don't believe in the structure of the society. I'm only talking, as Rory talked about, the issue of how do you create an inclusive society? No matter what we say on this phone, and I hear us, we have always been fighting as a people, and stop me if I'm wrong, please, anybody. Mm-hmm. We have been fighting to be included in this society. The struggle has always been how? What does that inclusiveness look like? We assimilated. I keep repeating this, and I know it's a repeat, Brother Carter. We assimilated, okay, but we never restructured the society to include us. Rory talks about the 7 articles. There were only 3 amendments out of those 27 amendments that Rory talks about. 3 of them directly address Black people, 13th, 14th, and 15th. As Rory gives us that history lesson, let us remind ourselves there were another, Rory, over 1,100 amendments that were proposed, but only 27 of them were adopted. Let's be very clear of that. And 3 of them specifically spoke to Black folk. But none of those, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and none of those other 27 ever addressed the issue of us being included in this society. And we have always fought for that. I remember Kwame Ture saying one time in his writings, Brother Stokely, he said at some point in time, the petitioner becomes a beggar. The petitioner becomes a beggar. And so at this point in time, I keep asking myself the question, are we still in the mode of begging? Are we still in the mode of playing games with ourselves collectively as a people? I'm just asking questions, my dear Brother Carter. For me, it's just an everyday question in terms of how do we uplift the majority of our people? How do we lead young people in a direction so they are not as confused as we were for X number of years and generations coming out of that institution of slavery? We begged folks to go across the street. They never begged. And I come out of a segregated environment in Mobile, Alabama, born and raised in segregated schools and loved it. But when they integrated going across the street, they never came across the street. In fact, the major high school here in Mobile, Alabama, Central High School, they closed it down and forced Black folks to go over to a high school, as an example, called Murphy, across the road, so to speak, across Government Street. And then after that, they built what? Private institutions throughout Mobile, Alabama, major private schools. And so I appreciate that segregation. I appreciate everything about our people, but I am concerned about the direction of our people at this point. And I tell everybody on this phone call, with all due respect to my sister who appears to be a pastor and the other brother who spoke about religion, I was taught leave religion at the door, leave your belief system on that at the door, and then we don't have this fallout around religion. Lastly, I would remind us, the civil rights movement was led by preachers. And I'm not sure in terms of where that civil rights movement led us. Dr. King, in closing, he said in his last book, if you read it, Where Do We Go From Here, from Chaos of Community? In his last manuscript, he talked about this issue of his concern that he had potentially led us into a burning house. What does that mean? That's another conversation in terms of what does it mean, how to manifest itself today. So, point of reference.
Yeah. Great reference. Brother Lewis, did you have a comment?
Hold on a second, please. 1 second.
Okay.
I'm struggling here. I do, but I still, let me say this real quick. I'm trying to do two things at one time, so I apologize.
That's okay. I understand that. Believe me.
I still don't understand how we can try to start the race in the middle. And what I mean by that is we've come from a country and we have relatives all over the world who, if you link with them, their plight, perhaps even ours, would be better off. And I don't understand how we start burning the candle from the bottom rather than, I don't understand why our conversations always exclude and does not go back to the continent where bright minds are, where our history is. And this is not a lesson in history. This is not a history lesson, is what I'm trying to say. I just find it ironic that we always start, man, from the standard that someone else has established for us here, which is not very high. And yet we have a continent that is full of wealth, is mentally, human resources are there. And everybody understands that except us. Everybody understands that. Forgive me for being passionate about this. Everybody understands that but us. I don't understand it. The Chinese are there now. They are overrunning Africa. I mean, they're giving loans. They're exchanging money from gold mines and platinum and materials that they themselves don't have in their continent. They are there by the thousands. Portuguese understood that. That's why they went there. British understood that. That's why they went there. Germans understood that. That's why they went there. Go all the way through. French understands it. That's why they went there. But we don't, in this country, we don't understand the value of the connectivity and the inclusiveness of that continent with those relatives. We don't. And I'm saying this because I rarely hear dialogue about connecting with our folks who have 63, 70, depending on what encyclopedia or what you're reading, 67% of most of the natural resources on this planet. And yet the folk over there are the poorest on this planet. But when we talk, I'm talking about us. I'm talking about black preachers in America. I'm talking about black politicians. I'm talking about black folk who got it going on, or whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Basketball players, folk who have millions of dollars a year. I rarely ever hear this topic of inclusiveness about our folks over there. Yet every other race and every other people have land grabbed, and all of the Belgians, you name it, on that continent. They understand the value, but we don't. I'm befuddled at that.
Okay.
I'm befuddled at that. I don't understand why all of our black universities here do not take all of their mental resources, and hook up with all of the folks over there who have a sponge mind, ready to suck up. Just don't have the opportunity. Suck up, whatever it is that we wish and want to do. And we could solve a lot of our problems, not overnight, please, but we could sleep over and skip over, and now, you can't exclude in this world that we're in. But I'm just saying, I just don't understand why this does not become a part of our conversation. It's like we start burning the candle from the wrong end. That's the way I feel. That's the way I feel about it. And I always have to put a plug in for Africa, because I'm saying, well, hey guys, excuse me, like a little kid in the class. Excuse me, what about Africa? How you gonna start from we always want folk to go back. If you're a psychologist or a counselor, you always say, take me back to the beginning. Tell me how you got started. Tell me, where did you but when it comes down to this economic story that we're talking about,
right,
we don't start from the beginning.
Thank you, Brother Lewis. Brother Lewis, I appreciate that. I really do. I appreciate your passion. Okay, we're in a lightning round. I got limited time, so I need you to give me a closing comment. And I need you to keep that comment very brief. Not you, Brother Lewis. I got your comment. You're good. I'm going to start with Brother Reggie.
My closing comment would be, I do not wish to think or to speak or to write with moderation. Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of a ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually take her baby out from a burning fire. So don't urge me to be moderate in terms of thinking that I'm progressing along this way. Don't ask me to keep being patient. I wish I came up with that, but that was said 200 plus years ago by William Lloyd Garrison. And I think that's my live by in this whole morality and capitalism conversation.
Thank you, brother. Brother Al.
I would agree with the comment that someone made that money is a very bad master, but we can't get away from it.
Correct.
Even when we talk about going back to the motherland, slavery as it existed in this country would not have existed had you not had Africans selling other Africans into slavery. And I'll leave it at that.
Very good. Brother Harold.
In reference to Brother Lewis' statement about Africa, Africa is not inclusive. Africa, or Mesopotamia, as it was called in that day, or even Iraq, which is the old Garden of Eden, was not inclusive. Sin happened in Iraq or Garden of Eden. They were not inclusive. Okay. We speak a lot about Africa, but remember, the early man migrated from Africa. They left the Three River Valley and went to another area. If Africa were inclusive, they wouldn't have never left. I agree with Brother Turner. We are still at the point where we are begging. I do not believe that we will ever see in my generation or my children's generation an America that will be all inclusive.
Brother Pearson.
I'm just sitting here trying to think of where can you go in this world where all of his people will think that they're being inclusive. And I'll just leave it at that.
Very good. Sister Johnson. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
My statement is simply, where do we go from here?
Outstanding. Very good statement. Brother Turner, as you close, do you have a closing statement?
Yeah, much love to everybody. And we keep on struggling. Thank you.
Amen to that. Brother Lewis, did you have a closing comment? Brother Edwards, do you have a closing comment?
I'd just like to say thank you, everybody, for tonight's conversation. This is the whole purpose of us having these conversations, is to push the envelope, is to not feel comfortable, is to take you out of your comfort zone. Because if you look at everybody on this particular panel, everybody was around during the civil rights movement. And so we need, if we're going to move the pendulum, or we're going to move it, we need to have more inclusive conversations. And again, I'm using the word as many ways as it can possibly be used. Inclusive conversations, which what I believe Reggie said, or Brother Lewis said, to include those which we're responsible for the outcomes to continue for us to have a legacy in this world. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Brother Lewis?
Chairman, I was on mute. I'm so sorry. But I appreciate also the dialogue, iron sharpens iron, and just a point of clarification. I never implied that Africa was inclusive. I'm only saying that we ought to get connected. Connectivity is important, and if you don't connect, you can't be inclusive. And I just think that it's a forgotten treasure that we should reconsider, that we should revisit. As a people, that's all I was saying. In for the most part.
Very well said. Very well said. Listen, we're at the end, and I want to say thank you so much for some spirited conversation. I love the opinions. I love people being able to articulate their thoughts. And we didn't necessarily. Some people say, well, there was disagreement. I don't think it was disagreement. I think it was learning. It was a matter of progressive conversation as we talk about a narrative that has been with us for a number of years, and God bless it, will be with us from henceforth. I want to make a special announcement. There will not be a Brother Can We Talk next week. We're going to take the week off. We'll be back to you. We hope that we'll be back to you on the 15th. There are a couple of misogynistic things we need to do to the program, so we're going to probably put a little different look at it on it for you that would enhance what we're doing. But thank you so much for being with us. Particularly tonight, I loved it. I loved all of you. Thank you for participating. and for your continued support. Look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. God bless. Be careful. Take care. I will just throw in this short narrative. If you haven't voted, please get out and do that. Vote your conscience, however you see that. Be careful. See you again soon. Take care. God bless. Good night.